If you were to ask me who I thought was deserving of the title of greatest filmmaker of all time, for me the answer is obvious: Steven Spielberg. Although his recent work seems to have fallen out of step with the current cultural zeitgeist, his iconic status should be indisputable. Name another director who has made the highest grossing movie of all time 3 times. Name another director who has mastered virtually every genre from B-movie horror to romantic comedy to Broadway-style musical. Name another director whose work has defined entire genres. No dinosaur movie can be made without being compared to Jurassic Park, no adventure movie can be made without being compared to Indiana Jones, no killer shark movie can be made without being compared to Jaws, and so on. Steven Spielberg's body of work is quite simply astonishing. The older I've gotten and the more I've grown as a filmmaker, the more I appreciate the great man's craft, but I was already a fan from a very young age. Between reruns of Star Trek and Ray Harryhausen films, I remember vividly being thrilled by Indiana Jones's death-defying stunts and spellbound by the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park. And while I'd love to talk about those films in more detail, for this series of videos I'm choosing to remain firmly within the realm of science fiction, beginning with a story which has its origins in Spielberg's childhood.
So one night, when I was a young child, and my dad woke me up in the middle of the night, and he said, "Come with me." And I was really groggy. I remember my dad got me in the car. He said, "I have a surprise for you." And he drove me a while, and we drove to this field. And there were all these people in this field, several dozen. And my dad brought a picnic blanket, and he put the blanket out on this grassy knoll, and we laid on the blanket, and we looked up at the sky. There was this fantastic meteor shower. And I just remember looking up at the sky, and every 15 to 20 seconds, there was a fantastic light across the sky. And I think that was my first introduction to the world beyond the earth. That probably first impregnated me with wanting to tell stories not of this world.
Like many breakout films of the 1970s, Close Encounters of the Third Kind was part of a wave of films which revamped the kinds of movies which were previously seen as B-movie schlock into A-movie blockbusters. Francis Ford Coppola turned the gangster movie from superficial shoot-'em-up into high drama with The Godfather. George Lucas reinvented the cheap-looking sci-fi adventure serial into a grand mythic spectacle, and Steven Spielberg elevated the monster movie with Jaws. However, before Jaws was released, the young director was already turning his eyes towards the stars. The UFO phenomenon was well known in pop culture ever since the highly publicized and subsequently embellished stories surrounding the Roswell, New Mexico incident. By the 1970s, Spielberg was already interested in UFOs, but he became an enthusiast upon reading the work of astronomer J. Allen Hynek, a former science consultant on Project Blue Book, the US Air Force's program to investigate UFO sightings. Spielberg said that reading Hynek's work pushed the UFO phenomenon out of the realm of science fiction and into the realm of science speculation. It was from Hynek's 1972 book The UFO Experience, A Scientific Inquiry, that Spielberg found the name for his film.
Well, a close encounter of the first kind is one is close, but nothing really happened.
Close encounter of the first kind is visible contact with a UFO.
Forget the shape and forget how fast it's going. It's something that you just can't explain.
Close encounters of the second kind are those which leave a physical trace. Holes in the ground,
Burn rings,
broken tree branches,
telephone lines down,
animals disturbed.
the stopping of car engines.
And the close encounters of the third kind are the most interesting of all.
Close encounter of the third kind is really when you meet them.
Before reading Hynek's work, Spielberg had already been developing an idea for a movie about UFOs. Coming off the success of Sugarland Express, the UFO film was to be a low-budget affair titled Watch the Skies, the title borrowed from the final line of dialogue in the movie The Thing from Another World. Though the film found interest from producers Julia and Michael Phillips at Columbia Pictures, coming up with a satisfying script proved difficult. Initially, Spielberg worked with writers Paul Schrader and later John Hill on the screenplay. Schrader's submission followed a police officer protagonist and heavily featured Project Blue Book, whereas Hill's script followed a US naval officer. Neither script satisfied. While Spielberg was still developing his UFO film, he was hired to direct Jaws for producers Richard D. Zunak and David Brown, who had previously produced Sugarland Express. Jaws was a famously troubled production which went over budget by over 100% and fell behind schedule by over 100 days. The experience was so miserable, Spielberg assumed he would never be allowed to work again. However, Jaws went on to be a huge critical and financial hit, becoming the highest-grossing movie of all time by the end of its theatrical run. Not only did Spielberg get to work again, but he was now an in-demand filmmaker, and suddenly his low-budget UFO movie was being looked at as another potential blockbuster. Having rejected Schrader's and Hill's scripts, Spielberg decided to knuckle down and write the movie himself. He had a clear picture of the third act, where the aliens make first contact at some kind of national monument, and essentially wrote backwards from there.
So all this was, out of order in my brain, but it found order when I began to write the script from the last scene backwards. And I remember Joe Alves gave me a model of Devil's Tower. Joe found Devil's Tower. He had looked at Shiprock and all the John Ford monuments, in Monument Valley, but it was all too well known to movie audiences. And Joe came back one day and says, I found the place you're looking for. It's called Devil's Tower, or Devil's Postpile in Wyoming. And he showed me these amazing pictures, and I just said, with all the fluted sides, that's it. That's the place.
When it came to casting the lead role of Roy Neary, Richard Dreyfuss campaigned for the part. Spielberg had already told the actor about the project during the making of Jaws, and Dreyfuss was intent on proving he was the right man for the job. Spielberg's first choice, however, was screen legend Steve McQueen.
And I went to meet with Steve McQueen in Trancas, California, where he had a house. And he wanted to meet me at a bar called the Doom Room. I've never been to a bar in my life. It was the first bar I'd ever really gone into. And I thought I had him because I even had 3 beers to his 14. You know what I'm saying? I was drinking the best I could. I don't drink. I mean, alcohol to me, half a glass of wine, I get a little ditzy. But Steve finally told me he couldn't play the character, and I said, why? He said, because I can't cry on film. I've never been able to cry on film. And this character, the way you have in your script, it even says he walks up and he turns, looks at his family, and he cries as he goes onto the mothership. And I said, okay, I'll cut out the crying. I'll cut out the crying part. He said, no. He said, the crying broke my heart. The crying actually almost made me cry reading the script. But he said, but once that camera's rolling, I don't think I'm going to be able to deliver the goods to you. And I respectfully have to, say I can't do it.
Al Pacino, James Caan, Dustin Hoffman, and Gene Hackman were also considered for the role before Spielberg finally agreed to give Dreyfuss the part.
And on the day that I said to him, you need a child, that's what you need for this part, he looked up and he said, you got the part.
The character Dr. Lacombe was inspired by real-life UFO expert Jacques Vallée, and so Spielberg wanted to cast a French actor for the character. Gérard Depardieu, Philippe Noiret, Jean-Louis Trintignant, and Lino Ventura were all considered. Spielberg eventually offered the role to the French New Wave legend François Truffaut, after seeing his performance in the movie The Wild Child. Close Encounters was the first movie Truffaut acted in without also writing or directing it. Playing Lacombe's assistant and translator was Bob Balaban as David Laughlin. Balaban learned French in high school but was far from fluent by the time he was offered the role. Thanks to Balaban brushing up on his French before shooting, he often acted as Truffaut's real-life translator while on set. Among those who auditioned for Roy's wife Ronnie Neary were Meryl Streep and Amy Irving. Spielberg wanted the character to embody the typical American suburban housewife, and thought Terry Garr fit the bill perfectly, after seeing her in a Coke commercial. Star Trek fans may recognize Garr from her appearance in the original series episode Assignment Earth. Garr also auditioned for the role of Gillian Guyler, mother to abducted Barry Guyler. The role proved to be a difficult one to cast, with Melinda Dillon landing the part only 3 days before filming her first scene. At the time, Dillon was shooting the film Bound for Glory with director Hal Ashby, and it was Ashby who recommended Dillon for the role. Playing Barry was a then 3-year-old Cary Guffey. Because of his young age, Guffey couldn't really be directed as an actor, so instead Spielberg conjured several methods to simply provoke the appropriate reaction from Guffey in each scene.
He was 3.5 years old when he made the movie, and he responded to visual aids more than anything else. He responded to, I would bring I would bring gift boxes to the set with a toy inside. And I would slowly unwrap the gift, telling him all along this was a present I had bought for him while the cameras were rolling. And I put the gift on the stepladder, so it would be as if he was looking up at the colors coming from the clouds down toward his farmhouse. And so as he's staring up, what he's really looking at, and the reason he's smiling like that is his eyes are salivating. I am kind of torturously unfolding this gift wrapping, undoing the bow one ribbon at a time and taking down the sides of the gift wrapping until a little toy car came out. And at one point in the movie, he actually says, "Toys, toys," because I brought toys out for him.
Toys! Toys!
The cast also featured early appearances from Lance Henriksen of Aliens fame as Robert, and Carl Weathers of Predator fame as a military police officer. Filming began in May 1976, split primarily between California and Alabama, with additional filming in Kalapur in India. After his horrific experience on Jaws, Spielberg initially wanted to shoot the entirety of Close Encounters on sound stages as opposed to on location. However, due to the broad range of locations in the script, it quickly became apparent that this wouldn't be feasible. However, several large exterior sets were built, including the hillside road where people gathered to watch the UFOs. The landing site for the alien spacecraft at the base of Devil's Tower was, and still is, the largest indoor movie set ever constructed. The only space big enough to house the set was an old blimp hangar in Mobile, Alabama, located on a former army base. Yet despite how huge the interior space was, the production team still had to extend it even further to accommodate the set. Not only was the initial construction of the set incredibly expensive, but the subsequent repair work added significantly to the budget after the set was damaged by a storm which swept through the area.
And I walked deep into the set, and suddenly a little pinhole of light appeared. And then it got bigger. And then it just exploded.
In the entire south half of the hangar, while we were shooting, we're looking over there going, look, look. Suddenly, the hangar blew off. I mean, literally the entire side of this thing, I don't know, 95 feet high, 150 feet wide, just went flying off into the air, exposing us to the elements.
And it just blew the set apart.
Like Jaws, Close Encounters would prove to be a chaotic and troubled production. Much of this was due to Spielberg's approach to filming. Allegedly, the director came up with new scenes during the night and added them to the schedule the next day. Like his previous film, Close Encounters was soon over budget and behind schedule. Columbia Pictures was suffering from financial difficulties at the time, and was counting on the film to be a blockbuster hit to avoid bankruptcy. The strain Columbia was under worsened when the production problems forced the studio to push the release date back from mid-1977 to November of that year. In the end, Columbia Pictures had to raise an additional $7 million to keep the film going.
The name of the book that I will never write is Stephen, Have They Figured Out Yet What I'm Looking Up in Awe At? Because throughout the movie Stephen hadn't figured out what it was that we were looking at.
Douglas Trumbull, who had created the visual effects for 2001: A Space Odyssey, was hired as visual effects supervisor for Close Encounters. Parallel to the production of Close Encounters, John Dykstra at ILM had invented the Dykstra Flex motion-controlled camera for Star Wars. However, Trumbull built his own motion-controlled system for Close Encounters.
We're going to use motion control. I said, "What's motion control?" He said, "That will allow you to pan and tilt and dolly and still lock the effects in the frame exactly where you want them." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." And that impressed me.
Because Spielberg wanted to emphasize the lights on each alien ship, most of the models were some kind of irregular shape with lights stuck inside them. One of the ships seen in the Devil's Tower sequence is simply a gas mask with lights inside. The mothership was originally envisioned as being all black, a huge dark shape which would blot out the stars behind it. However, Spielberg abandoned this idea when he was inspired by the sight of a refinery by the roadside while shooting in India. He enlisted famed concept artist Ralph McQuarrie to design the ship, and the model was built by Greg Jean and Dennis Murin.
There's a shot in the film that's a tight shot on the mothership when it's rising up, and we were looking for interesting parts for these close-ups that could go, moving by in the frame that might be nice to look at. And we found an angle that looked really good, and as we were dressing it, Greg Jean and I, we thought about, well, why don't we put a little R2-D2 up there, upside down, hanging in there. But not to make it too obvious, we won't light him up, but we'll light the area behind him so you'll see his silhouette.
For the music of the film, Spielberg brought on John Williams, who was just coming off the immense success of Star Wars. It was Spielberg's idea to use music to communicate with aliens, due to music's relationship with mathematics. Spielberg and Williams spent many hours going through hundreds of 5-note combinations for the main motif before finally settling on the one used in the film. Post-production on the film proved to be just as big a challenge as the production itself, with Spielberg even asking Columbia if they could push the release date back to the following year. Columbia, however, needed the film to come out in '77, so they refused. Spielberg worked tirelessly with editor Michael Kahn to finish the film in time. During the edit, Spielberg realized he needed extra scenes to give the film more of a wow factor, so pickups were authorized by the studio at further expense. These pickups included the discovery of Flight 19, which opens the film. The alien who exchanges hand signals with Lacombe was also reshot, with a more articulate animatronic puppet. For the film's climax, Kahn had to sift through thousands of feet of film to put together a coherent sequence. There was a lot more footage of the various aliens shot on the day, but most of it was deemed unusable.
I remember we shot a lot of different things that failed. You know, a lot of different versions of the extraterrestrials that ultimately didn't work out. And
the extraterrestrials were supposed to, and this never really worked out, they were supposed to move very, very quickly. Now, they were going to shoot the extraterrestrials at a lower speed so that it would appear that the action was all speeded up. So the extraterrestrials, to accentuate this, they were all supposed to shuffle their feet and move their hands like this and move really jumpy. Then when the film was speeded up, they would be so fast, they would be like flies buzzing around. It would be so exciting. Well, in the meantime, they simultaneously trained a bunch of mimes who were pretending to be technicians, American, from Earth technicians. So the mimes would run over to see the extraterrestrials in slow motion, so that when the camera was sped up, they would get to be correct, and the extraterrestrials who were going like this, fast hands, fast feet, they'd yell, they would get even faster, and it would all be this perfect blend. But of course, you can't really deal with human motion that way. So there's no real way to slow yourself down so that you all speed up correctly. And some were on wires, they flew, they twirled around. It was very complicated. They worked for months and months. They couldn't use any of that stuff.
Though Close Encounters was delivered on time, Spielberg was never fully satisfied with the theatrical cut. He later said the production of Close Encounters ended up being even harder than Jaws. But after such an arduous production, Close Encounters of the Third Kind was released nationally on the 14th of December, 1977.
Close Encounters of the First Kind. Sighting of an unidentified flying object. Close Encounters of the Second Kind. Physical evidence of a UFO. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Actual contact. Columbia Pictures, in association with EMI, presents Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
If you're enjoying this retrospective review, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel, or if you want to support this channel more directly, join my Patreon where you can see videos like this early, uncut, and ad-free. When Close Encounters of the Third Kind debuted in 1977, I could only imagine the kind of impact it must have had. Audiences were no strangers to aliens and flying saucers in movies, but that kind of subject matter was usually in the domain of cheap B-movies from a bygone era. And at the tail end of such a cynical decade of cinema, to be greeted with that familiar iconography with more naturalism, more spectacle, and more optimism than ever before must have been dazzling. This is why it may be a somewhat controversial statement to say that Close Encounters of the Third Kind doesn't really hold up. It certainly does in its technical aspects though. The visual effects look stunning even to this day. Velos Zsigmond's cinematography is gorgeous, and John Williams' score is iconic. I haven't stopped humming the main theme since rewatching the film for this video. The emphasis on light rather than shape in the visual effects designs means the alien spacecraft are just as beautiful as they are scary. They are intimidating and dangerous, but there's also something enticing about them. As a viewer, we understand why someone would be so compelled to see more of these things. That emphasis on light is complemented brilliantly by Milos Zsigmond's cinematography. The use of anamorphic lenses expands those points of light into huge halos and beaming flares. There's a soft vignette around most of the frame, which gives the movie a dreamlike quality at times. And there's a nice contrast between the primary colours of the aliens and the warmer, earthy tones of the everyday world, which feels appropriately lived in and messy. There's no denying it's a beautifully presented movie, but the story it tells and how it tells it has many problems. It suffers from a lack of focus, with many disparate plot threads and storylines which struggle to fully resolve. We have a mother whose son is abducted by aliens, a working man who drives his family away due to his obsession, and a government conspiracy involving first contact with an alien civilization. It doesn't sound all that messy when one lays it out like that, but the problem is that none of these threads have any effect on each other for most of the movie. Roy and Gillian meet, but they aren't actively working towards the same goal until much later. Roy's obsession also doesn't bring him any closer to the government conspiracy until the last third of the film. This lack of focus also raises some questions about the extraterrestrials themselves. Why do they implant random people with a psychic message to meet at Devil's Tower if they also just tell the government where to meet via coordinates transmitted electronically? At one point, Dr. Lacombe even says of these random people, "C'est bilingue, mon ennui." But this is never resolved. Richard Dreyfuss's Roy Neary is also pretty hard to like at times. Neary's obsession destroying his relationship with his family is an interesting idea, and I'm not saying that all movie protagonists have to be likable. However, this is quite a dark storyline which clashes harshly with the family adventure tone of the rest of the movie. Ultimately, it's difficult to know what we're supposed to think of Roy by the third act. Gillian's obsession drives her to find her son. Her story thread has some clear stakes, but I can't say I care all that much if Roy never gets to meet the aliens. Strangely, Close Encounters is a rare movie where its parts outshine the whole. It feels like a movie made of vignettes. Spielberg clearly had a lot of ideas about UFOs which he wanted to explore, and many of them are explored in strongly directed, compelling scenes. The discovery of Flight 19, the air traffic control scene, and the chase across Indiana are all great sequences, but they're all strung together along quite a flimsy plot. At best, much of the second act feels disjointed, and at worst, it feels boring. The climactic first contact sequence, however, is where the movie truly shines, and it's worth watching the movie for this climax alone. In fact, like many of the aforementioned sequences, the final 30 minutes almost work as a standalone short film. The musical communication idea is simply inspired, and allows the sequence to transpire virtually without any dialogue at all. Instead, the movie delivers a never-ending display of incredible sights and sounds which are utterly spellbinding. Spielberg's camera emphasizes both the scale of the event with these big landscape and crowd shots, but it also highlights the feelings it instills in each individual with more intimate reaction shots sprinkled throughout. But what carries the sequence is John Williams' music. At first it's all heavy brass and then melodic horns to highlight the terror and power of the extraterrestrials. But this slowly shifts into high strings, winds, and choral music, transitioning the piece into something truly miraculous feeling. It's easily some of the best work of John Williams' career, which is saying something. This end sequence and the earlier sequence showing Barry's abduction are the real highlights of the film because they so perfectly capture the core concept behind the story, the possibilities of the unknown. Sure, the unknown can be scary, terrifying even, but if seen from a child's perspective, the unknown can also be something wondrous and captivating. And that's what stays with me the most, the film's optimism. I like Independence Day as much as the next guy, but Close Encounters' notion that beings from another world would want to be our friends is, I think, really lovely. For all its faults, Close Encounters of the Third Kind has a big heart. There's a strong sense that this is a very personal film, personal on a level Steven Spielberg himself may not have been aware of.
Your father was a computer scientist, your mother was a musician. When the spaceship lands, how do they communicate?
That's a very good question. I like that. You've answered the question.
They make music on their computers, and they are able to speak to each other.
And you see, I'd love to say, you know, I intended that and I realized that was my mother and father, but not until this moment.
Spielberg is sometimes ridiculed for being overly sentimental, but I think it's precisely that quality that allows Close Encounters to resonate with so many people, even to this day. Since 1977, moviegoers have seen entire galaxies of aliens, spaceships, and adventures, but few, if any, movies have truly captured what Close Encounters captured. The sense that there's more to our world, to the universe, and our lives than we could ever have imagined. The sense that anything is possible. Columbia Pictures needed Close Encounters to be a blockbuster hit, and luckily the gamble paid off. The film was a critical and commercial hit, with many praising the visual effects, music, and whimsical tone of the story. The film went on to gross over $300 million worldwide against its final budget of $19.4 million. Thanks to the film's success, Spielberg negotiated with Columbia to create a second cut and reissue of the film. Finishing the film to Spielberg's satisfaction would cost a further $1.5 million, so the studio agreed to reissue the film, but only on the condition that Spielberg show the inside of the mothership. For this cut, Spielberg also added the scene in which Lacombe's team discover the Cotopaxi. The scene was shot in the California desert and used a simple forced perspective trick. A large miniature of the ship was placed near the camera, with the actors and their vehicles way off in the distance. The special edition cut was released in 1980, grossing a further $15 million at the box office. While this new cut was well reviewed, Spielberg regretted showing the inside of the mothership, and so in 1998, Spielberg was allowed to make yet another cut of the film for a collector's edition VHS release, though it subsequently became known as the director's cut. The director's cut is comfortably the best version of the film. Though longer than the theatrical cut, small alterations here and there tighten the pacing of many scenes. Losing the inside of the mothership but retaining the Cotopaxis scene succeeds in adding to the film's sense of wonder while still leaving room for the viewer's imagination. The inclusion of the shower scene in the second act also improves the family drama thread somewhat. It gives Roy some self-awareness and shows the lack of support from his family. In my opinion, it doesn't fully justify his later actions, but it makes the family conflict less one-sided. There are many little improvements like this throughout the director's cut. I'd highly recommend picking up the 40th anniversary 4K release of the film. Not only does it include stunning transfers of all three cuts of the film, but it's also packed with bonus material. It's definitely worth adding to your Blu-ray collection if you're a fan of this movie. Close Encounters' pop culture impact can be seen far and wide in the decades that followed. A government conspiracy hiding extraterrestrial activity has been fertile ground for many shows and movies since, most notably The X-Files, which took the idea in a darker horror thriller direction. Spielberg's own TV miniseries Taken is arguably a more successful version of the original concept behind Close Encounters. While the show's production values are dated by now, its ensemble of rich characters and compelling drama is woven in with the science fiction elements more coherently than the same elements were in Close Encounters. It's a slow burn, but the series is definitely worth checking out if you're curious. Over the years, many filmmakers have cited Close Encounters as one of their favourite films. Dune director Denis Villeneuve in particular cited the influence of the movie during the making of his sci-fi film Arrival.
Arrival, to me, is the best movie I've seen post-Close Encounters, and the movie that got me the most excited and reignited my interest in the eventual meeting of great civilizations.
What can I say? Close Encounters is like one of my favorite movies of all time, and a movie that had the most influence on me. And for me, the aliens of Spielberg are a representation of the goodness of nature. Like something that beyond life and death, there's something good there. And that's very reassuring for a human being, I think.
For me, Close Encounters of the Third Kind is not one of my favourite Spielberg films, but it is one I come back to despite its flaws. It's also a fascinating snapshot of the master filmmaker's early career. Having cut his teeth on low-budget TV movies, Spielberg's first forays into big-budget features were financially irresponsible production nightmares, saved only by virtue of being remarkably good films. However, Spielberg's next feature would prove to be a major wake-up call. The World War II comedy 1941 is by no means a terrible movie. It shines in many respects, but it is an unfocused exercise in excess. Once again, the film fell behind schedule and went over budget, and unfortunately this time, Spielberg couldn't count on critical praise or box office success to rescue it. The film wasn't actually the box office disaster many people think of it as, but it majorly underperformed and was critically panned. Luckily, George Lucas came to the rescue by offering Spielberg the chance to direct Raiders of the Lost Ark. And as opposed to the bloated, lumbering productions of his previous films, the production of Raiders of the Lost Ark was tightly controlled. Perhaps due to George Lucas's influence as a producer, Spielberg reined in his perfectionist instincts and managed to wrap the film ahead of schedule and within budget for a change, while still delivering a great movie. Raiders of the Lost Ark, of course, would go on to achieve huge box office success and critical praise and become a pop culture icon. It was a film which showed Spielberg he didn't have to trade practicality for artistic merit like he thought he did with Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
I'm now a movie producer as well as a director, whereas in 1975 or 76 I was just a director, and I was much more idealistic then. So I look at Close Encounters and I see a very sweet, idealistic odyssey about a man who gives up everything in pursuit of his dreams or his obsession. In 1997, I would never make Close Encounters the way I made it in 1977 because I have a family that I would never leave. It's the one film I see that dates me, that I really look back and see who I was 20 years ago compared to who I am now. And the image that always comes to my mind is when the little boy opens the door and all that orange light, yellow light pour across him. When I designed the shot and when I wrote it in the script, for me that was very symbolic of what only a child can do, is to trust the light. You know, open a door when an adult would run and hide and say, don't open the door, lock the door. There's things outside we don't understand, things that could kill us or change us. But the optimism of childhood and opening that door, and light being the presence of everything. Light is the inclusion of all colors, whereas black is the absence of all colors. That light was something that that boy wanted to know more about. And so for me, thematically, Close Encounters is all about children opening doors onto beautiful sources of light.
But Steven Spielberg was far from done with science fiction. In fact, Close Encounters would plant the seeds for his next adventure with extraterrestrials.
And when the little extraterrestrial did the Kodai hand signs to Francois Truffaut, turned around and went back on the ship, I thought, wait a second, what if that extraterrestrial didn't go back on the ship? What if it was a foreign exchange program and the astronauts, or the cosmonauts, or whatever you want to call them, the terrestrial nauts, go up on the ship with Richard Dreyfuss in exchange for one extraterrestrial staying behind as an ambassador in good faith. And I began to think about, should I change my movie right now? And then I thought, you know something, that notion really jives with this imaginary friend concept I've been working on all my life. So I brought it to Columbia. Of course, the rest is history.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video and want to see more like it, early, uncut, and ad-free, then hop over to my Patreon page where you can support the channel more directly. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank all of my patrons and members whose names are currently on your screen. I'd also like to say an ultra thanks to Retro PC Gamer, Benjamin Stokes, Hiroshi the Dog, Movie Magic, Charles Borsam, Olivia Computer, Bano, Dent the Air, Extreme Streamers, Tom, Dusk, Colin Camille, Patrick Fleming, Matthew Camille, Ed Mark Starr, Dylan Thomas, Lilac Yane, Howard Craig Kervik, and Caging G. Thank you once again for watching, and until next time,
keep watching the skies! Skies.